Okay, just documenting game in development, synSpace Drone Runners, available in Google Play Store and for the Kindle Fire HD. This is a development snapshot, version 1.09, Super Fun Time Power Show. This brings up a menu bar and turns off the user interface for the game, which is still running down below, so you could see ships flying by, things blowing up. Someday this is where the star map editor will live. And I will add links to the shell and face editors because I want this to be sort of a single place you can go in a menu you can navigate to get to any of your collectible types. I'm also trying to introduce a new collectible, critters. This is my example biped. It has 16 bones total from the toe bones to the wrist bone, but I'm thinking basically of the hands, feet, and head as being clip-on objects that could potentially be separate critters. Like you could have a highly detailed in-fingered hand that you made as a critter on its own right and had its own animations, its own poses, etc. And then it would be a child critter to this critter. So I'm kind of thinking of composite critters. More prosaically, I was thinking of farmy and weapons for the various animals to carry around. The point is, on this screen, you design your skeleton, which is, which bones connect to which other bones. If you tap on one of the circles here, you see the name of the bone. From the side. And for those of you with your red-blue glasses on, ooh, red-blue glasses, 3D. Anyway, we're just going to reset that for now. But basically, with the skeleton editor, you're defining what bones exist and how they are parented, which bone connects to which other bone, and the radius of the joints, which also controls the mass of those joints, which will be important in the interior physics system. I could just drag this node down, and now my left arm, that lower bone there, is longer. Now when I go to make a pose, it's the same skeleton, but I can no longer change the bone lengths. These are now fixed bone lengths. So all I'm changing now is a pose. And when I change a pose, it doesn't affect the skeleton. Okay? And down here we see a list of, basically this is a list of all the poses you could have. Okay, so I do enforce a limit of no more than 64 poses for a single critter. So let's say I want to edit pose 12. So I'm just doing XYZ, and it's a little bit like moving a rigging control if you were in Blender and you had a nicely rigged skeleton, you'd have these kind of knobs you could yank on that don't just move one joint, they kind of move a whole set of joints together using sort of an IK feedback, an inverse kinematic feedback. And I'm doing my own little version of that here. Basically, I let you drag this thing anywhere you want. That joint moves, and it uses your camera angle. So if I go like this and move it like that, it'll go straight back. But if I do it like this and do the same motion, it'll go to the side. The up and down motion, though, always means, no matter what the camera angle is, the up and down motion always means literally straight up, straight down. If I drag down here, it's going to stretch the bone. So I'm going to be able to compute this quaternion that represents rotation from the old bone to the new bone, and that's going to give me my new angle relative to my parent bone. But my length is wrong. So what I do is I try to pull my parent towards me to get my length correct, but I may not do that all the way in one step. I may only come a little bit around in one step, and then in the next step I get a little closer, the next step I get a little closer, next step I get a little closer, so that it doesn't just go snap to the final solution, but you actually see the skeleton animate its way to the final solution. It back propagates the change, so like it'll pull the elbow to come along to follow the wrist, and then it'll pull the shoulder to follow the elbow, and it'll pull the neck bone to follow that, and it should just kind of straighten out the bone chain, so that when I'm really tugging at the skeleton, it should start off being sort of gently curved, like a fishing pole, but if you ever have to snap it all the way around, it ultimately stretches all the way out to a completely straight, flat line. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tug on this in various ways. And again, you don't tug on it directly, you select it, and then you give commands over here in the proxy. And I do it that way mainly so that your finger's not on top of the thing you're trying to move. so that you can see it. And that's a problem you don't have with a mouse. So this is like a little mouse pad off to the side. And so now I'm going to sweep to the right. I want it to be completely smooth so that I move back and forth and this little thing just orbits around in a circle and everything adjusts in real time. That's what I want it to do. But as you can see, it's very uncomfortable about ever being out of length and, you know, having bones of the wrong length. So I have to kind of go fast to get it over the hurdle. But see how it tugged his neck bone a little to the side. Yeah, see, and then it snaps all the way back because, anyway, I have a bug, is what I'm saying, that this first implementation didn't work quite right. But you get a glimmer of what I'm going for here, where moving this guy actually has an effect. And, you know, I already demonstrated that here. And also, even though I'm now posed, I still have the extra long bone because the skeleton had the long bone. So I go back to the bones, and I go back to here, and now I just edit him back to something similar. And go back to the pose, and his pose now is that pose, but with a normal length bone. And that was all done inside of pose slot 12. And if I switch to pose slot 15, it doesn't have it. And if I go back to 12, it does. That's the small miracle. That's the thing that I really need to be pointing out as new. It changes back. But basically, I kind of want the critter to be constantly in a looping animation, whether it's the standing loop or the sitting loop or the walking loop or the swimming loop or the flying loop or whatever. Because this is basically your Pokemon stage where you pit one of your critters against another critter, and I'm planning on taking full use of the multiplayers there, so that basically if somebody else is on the server, you know, playing a space game with you, they can also pop into their arena, and your arena and their arena will turn out to be connected to be the same arena. And when you drop a critter into your arena, they'll see it, and when they drop a critter to their arena, you'll see it, and if the third player drops their critter, you'll see that. And then each of you will have a remote control for your critter, and the remote control basically documents the host API. So in your game environment, like for example your Lewis script for your star map, it would be able to push these buttons on the remote control, so to speak. And those would basically goad your critter into some course of action that you wanted him to do, and he would do that for some period of time, after which he would go back into doing things that he wanted to do. I don't know. Now, at the same time, I want to be computing the center of mass of all those joints and noting when he's in danger of falling over. And now, not actually having him fall over, but have him automatically reposing his own joints so as to not be falling over. And that's where I am on that. So next, my goal is to make sure that I can pose exactly as I want to. Okay, development snapshot for game synSpace drone runners, a new critter asset module. What we have here is today's version of the critter editor. Recap, this is part of the Super Fun Time Power Show, which brings up this menu bar and turns off the interface. But if you hit back arrow, it closes it out and you're back in the game. And just for fun today, we'll leave ourselves with a little bit of velocity. Okay, now we'll open the Super Fun Time Power Show and open the critter editor. This page would normally show us the critters that we've collected, and we would select a particular critter at that point. Right now it's just a sort of a test critter, as it were. So the bones page shows us what the skeleton looks like. This is just the bones, this is just the skeleton. So if you want to have like a longer bone, you would select it here and like stretch it. Ideally, you'd be in a T pose here, where you would put your arms out to the sides. But also, I need to make some other demo skeletons, and then when you push the new button, instead of just resetting to this demo biped, it'll give you a choice of several skeletons to start with, and then after that, I'll have one button that I'm thinking of calling it copy/cut. If you're pointing to like the shoulder bone and then you tap the copy cut button, it just makes a copy of it on the clipboard, and I'm thinking of visualizing the clipboard as like kind of just sort of like floating in space over here to the left, like just to remind you you have an arm on your clipboard. But the original arm is still there because you just tapped. But if you long press, it does the copy first, so it goes on the clipboard first, but as you long press, a little timer goes, you know, are you sure, are you sure, are you sure, are you sure, watch out, it's going to do it, it's going to do it. So you have a little warning if you didn't mean to, but then it cuts it, i.e. it deletes it. So it then disappears from the skeleton here, but it's still on the clipboard. And then another button basically is attach. In an existing chain of bones, like between here and here, I'd like to add one bone. So I need sort of an insert bone kind of operator that breaks the current bone and makes it into two. And the reason for that is that, say I wanted to add a second set of arms, I would select this shoulder, I would copy it, it would show up on the clipboard, select a bone in the back, and then I would click paste, and then this arm from the clipboard would get glued on to this guy, presumably with the same starting offset delta that it had, because that went with it, that came with it when we copied it. The stick comes before the ball. If I really did want to add more arms or add wings, this clipboard, couldn't I preload it from a set of predefined parts? Like, couldn't I have like an arm part and a leg part and a tail part and a wing part? And shouldn't all my parts just sort of automatically figure out if they're a right side of the body versus a left side of the body part? But anyway, so the point is, on the bone screen, you're setting up the skeleton, and it should be in a T pose, and you should avoid the desire to pose it. But you kind of have to pose it to fit. If you're being given a mesh and you had no control over the mesh, then you need to pose the skeleton as required to work with that mesh. But don't think of the skeleton as being a pose. It's just kind of a way to set the bone weights to the mesh. A pose, for example, this same skeleton is now being used as the source of up to 64 poses. So down here along the bottom now, you can see the now properly scrolling 64 pose slots, most of which are not currently in use. Woo! That's cool. So I've just made some random poses in these. So you just tap one and you get the pose, 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 pose. Okay. So basically you pick a slot like that one, and then you pick a part to move, and if I turn sideways and then move straight to the left, it'll try to move the leg straight to the left. But because the bones are not allowed to stretch, instead of going straight to the left, it'll actually kind of roll up. The other joints are pulled in with it to make it happen, but in this case I don't have a joint constraint here forcing that guy to be positive. So right there, presumably that really hurts. So I kind of want to do my constraint system in that way, where basically there's a springiness that as you reach the constraint condition, there is increased resistance to go with the compression of that spring, so to speak, the deflection past the point of comfort, that there's an actual numerical pain value associated with that, which saps from the energy value of the critter, and maybe even, you know, makes him limp or something. If I have the camera at like a 45-degree angle and I start wiggling back and forth, then the wiggles will be kind of at a 45-degree angle. I don't know if you can tell, but that line there normally would have been going straight back had I been looking at the camera from the side when I did it. Now there's a bug right now that every time I start a new edit, it flips back to the original. So that's the bug I have to fix next. Is that really what I want to show? Just that you can pose them now, and the poses are saved in the slot that you've selected. So if I just start moving something, you can also see it changing down here. Woo! And if I change the camera view, you can see it affects both places. Oh, hello, I'm coy and cute and clever and sweet, and I'm a skeleton that can't be beat. If you attack me, I'll attack you with my feet. It's my toe bone. Toe bone, toe bone. Toe bone. Toe bone. But here, I'm doing more of a, you give me the point, and you just translate the point to where you wish it could be. I wish the point could be there. And then I try to just bend as many bones as I need to, going back to the root, to achieve the goal of delivering your hand to the location you asked for, your wrist rather, while preserving the lengths of all the bones in question. Oh, and the VR, the red-blue glasses stuff, should also apply to the treadmill. So dim. It's well, I think it'll, if I keep the glasses on for long enough, it'll eventually fuse for me. But and it's not a real dramatic pose. Let's stick the hand way out to the side, and then let's tap on it again to make it okay. So now, does that wrist look like it's coming up out of the screen? I almost see it. You want to get to the point where you're no longer seeing any red or blue bones. You're just seeing kind of a gray bone. It's funny, the blue lens just doesn't feel like it's attenuating light very much, whereas the red lens feels like I'm looking through really thick, you know, welding goggles. Yeah, that looks like my fingers behind it to me. Yeah, I'm seeing that now. Yeah, I'd say that it takes a while, but for me that ends up being a working illusion that could actually be useful. But I just did it as a gag. And then if you actually are in contact with a button, then I want it to sort of self-describe down below there. I'm going to allocate a button for add current pose to timeline. So then you'll come over here to pose, and you'll pick the pose you want, and you'll go to animate, and you'll add it. And while you're in animate, you'll see the timeline, which will look an awful lot like one of these, only now instead of a list of all the pose slots, it's just a list of just the poses that you've selected. And it's not copies of the poses, it's a reference to those actual slots. So after you've made the animation, if you go back later and change those poses, it will affect the animation. That's a dual edge stored, so don't do it by accident. So then this guy presumably will just be playing out the animation, whatever animation you're doing. So this timeline will probably have something moving on it, like maybe a little vertical bar showing you exactly where you are, and maybe if you tap down here, you can stop at any point, and then there'll be some sort of dragging of the individual clips, the individual poses, to get the timing the way you like it. And the idea will be that when the time hits the center of the pose, that's the moment in time it will be exactly at that pose. And just before it, it'll be just arriving at the pose, and just after it'll be leaving on its way to the next pose. That's the keyframe instant, and that's the moment in time when we can send events, I think, send triggers. And I'll need a play and a stop and a pause and a single step and that kind of stuff, which I think will be kind of associated with the timeline in some way. Like I don't know exactly, but I'm kind of feeling like there could be some play media controls, like right about here. So for dancing, I think there's some really interesting possibilities here. For all practical purposes, it is not unfair to consider many animations are going to be some form of attack. So here's his kick attack. Okay, he's just kicked you. So now the animation is, I kick you, I kick you, I kick you, I kick you. But instead of just leaping to the position, it lerps to the position. Okay, a little progress. Let's notice I have a couple of poses here. I have pose 0, where we see a bent right knee and left leg straight, and then pose 1, where the left leg is now in a kicking posture. The right knee is still bent. The arms are curving slightly back, and in pose 1 they were curving slightly forward. Okay, so now if we go to animation, this is just lerping from pose 0 to pose 1 over and over again, and I'm giving it 5 seconds to complete it. So we see the right knee stays bent the whole time. We see the left leg slowly slurps up to pose 1 and then instantly drops back to pose 0. And the same with the arms. We see them slowly pulled back and then jump back forward, boop, and then go back. And if we come over here to pose 1 and we change something like let's bend his head forward quite a bit, and so now he's almost like an airplane in pose 1. So now we go back to the animate, and we see now he bows at the same time, bends over at the same time. Did I have that on screen? Yeah, I think so. So anyway, basic animation. If we look over here in bones, you can see that for this purpose I've got the skeleton in a T-pose, but I've intentionally put the leg out at a funny angle, which also gives it a funny length. But let's put it back. Put the ankle there. Put the toe bone there. So now the skeleton quote looks normal again. Okay, the left foot's a little messed up, but let's see what that looks like. So we look at the poses. We look at pose 0, and you can see left foot is still a little messed up, and we pose right. It's a little messed up, but you notice the right knee is no longer bent because that was just inherited from the skeleton. So that was an additional rotation which would be applied to all the poses all at once. So you don't want to do that by accident. And we go back to animate, and we see that the leg is no longer bent, but we do see that foot is a little twisted still. So since this is important, we will try to fix that foot more officially. So the screen's so dim. Okay, so like that. Now the camera's in the plane of the floor. So if I grab the ankle now, okay, so those are now like that, and we go back to animate, and they look about right, and we see now the little man is doing all those little things all at once, all at the same time. The end. Thank you very much. Okay, quickie demo of first multi-stage animation. My little man is doing a kind of a walk cycle kind of prototype, And then he stops and he looks at his feet and he's not sure if he should keep going, and then he continues on. So that's my great animation, and it's looping. And if I go over to pose mode, you can see that I have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 poses. These are the 6 poses used in the animation, that it's cycling through them and then going back to the beginning, kinda. But normally eventually you'll see a timeline down here. I'm not quite sure what the visualization will be, but it'll probably look a lot like this. But this is not the timeline, this is just some poses. But I can look at the first pose, the second. This is the order in which I have them coming in the timeline. So I just did a really simple, right leg forward, left leg forward, both legs about the same, but right leg, both legs about the same, but left leg, and I just left the top alone. And at the ends, I don't have the ability to copy and paste, and I foolishly forgot that I do have the ability to use the same pose as more than one keyframe. So doing something like this, what I need to do right now is I need to make sure that whatever keyframe I used for the first one, I also use for the last one. Because the way it does right now is it blends keyframe to keyframe to keyframe, and then when it gets to the end, it snaps to the first one, so you don't want there to be any difference between those two. But because I was an idiot, I tried to draw another one that was similar, and then I figured it out, and so now it goes to this one, then it goes to this one, and then it snaps to this one. Yeah, okay, pretty exciting. Oh, here, why don't we make this frame sort of an indecision frame? Like, I don't know. He puts his hands up as if to say, I don't know what it means. Okay, so let's see if that works. So he looks, he takes a footstep. He takes another footstep. His hip goes quite far back there. And then he puts his hands up, what? And looks down and is all sad and does it again. Takes a second step. And he puts his hands up. What? I don't know. He looks down and goes on. Okay, so what else don't we like about that? That's his knees a little backwards there. Yeah, I think that's more walky. And then, okay, how's that look? Step. Oh, I'm so sorry. I will step again. So we go back to animate, and now the arms are normal. Okay, now what about the legs? What could we do? Okay, well, let's just go for it. The knees are very important. What happens if we make the character, what's that called? Bow-legged. Okay, the skeleton is bow-legged. So the walk now is a little bit bow-legged. And is that about the same amount of bow-leggedness? Yep. Okay, does it still look like a walk from the side? Well, again, this is the very first animation ever, so it's not supposed to be perfect. So, what about size? Let's make this a much shorter, stubbier character. Okay, so let's bring the chest down and the shoulders down, and make them sloping down shoulders, and then bring the elbows down a little. Oh, that's different. Bring the neck down. Well, let's let the head stay high like that. Okay, and let's see, I think I can lower the whole thing this way. Okay, so now I have a little short creature with a long neck, and I go to the animation, and it's a shorter creature with a long neck. And I think the animation's about the same quality. doesn't look like it's necessarily picked up too much weirdness. The toes may be sticking out to the side more than before. Is that true of the skeleton itself? Well, yeah, it kind of is. But ultimately what I want to be doing is I want to be dragging the root over the ground. And then I want the critter to say, for it to make sense for my root to be dragged over the ground like that, my feet better be moving like this. And then when the time comes for him to say, well, I know I need to move this foot, but how? How will I move this foot? Then it goes to look at a pose, and it says, oh, this is the official pose with that foot sticking forward, so I'll head in that direction. Okay, thank you. That's just today's update. Okay, another progress video for synSpace Drone Runners, available in the Google Play Store and for the Kindle Fire HD. And it's a space game, shoot 'em up, with something new called the Super Fun Time Power Show. And the main new thing in that is the skeleton creator thingy. So you form a skeleton first, and I don't want to talk about that right now. And then eventually there'll be a skin. But at this point we are posing things. So you have 64 pose slots, and you select a slot like that one. There's nothing posed yet. And let's have him lift his little arm up. Hi. And in this slot, let's have his little arm up again. Let's go back and forth. Okay, that's pretty good. And then we can animate that by, this procedure is a little odd, but you select the first frame, then you tap on animate, and you say key. You're adding a keyframe. Then you go back to pose, and you tap the second frame, and then you go back to animate, and you tap key again, and then you go, and so now it's just going between two poses and then snap back to the first. So anyway, so now we have a simple little animation, and you can see also the foot is moving this animation. But anyway, let's go back here, and let's focus on the feet for a moment. And you see this little purple square that the thing is standing on. If I grab the toe and lift it up, and let's drag it out to move the heel as well. Okay, as soon as, let's move the knee up as well and bring the heel back. As soon as we lost our ground contact, so down here in the plane of the dirt, which you can tell by the ground plane, this gray line here, the front and back, when they're lined up, then the camera is in the plane of the dirt. And so this foot's up in the air, and that foot's solidly on the ground. The foot that's on the ground is contributing this little rectangle here. And if any part of this foot ever hits the ground, then it extends that rectangle to include that point. So if I move my toe around, but if I lift my toe, drop, dip it, lift it, so here my toe is, oops, my toe is just a little bit above the ground. So I bring it back down, and now it's on the ground, and this is what I call my ground contact region. Meanwhile, the pose itself, each joint has a mass associated with it, and as the pose moves the creature around, the center of mass also moves around, and I currently am depicting that center of mass with this circle here. So if I move a particularly heavy part, like the head, I think that's the heaviest part, I'm going to move it forward-ish, and you see the center of mass moves forward to follow. And if I keep dragging and the whole skeleton was dragged forward, you see the center of mass is still moving. Works there, and then it still is in existence here. So in theory, that should be a VR. I say VR, I just mean red-blue glasses. It's my little joke. Sorry for the digression. So anyway, so as the animation plays, you can see that has an effect on the center of mass. And you can see when the animation jerks, instead of moving smoothly, the center of mass jerks. So it's sort of an, if you needed an indication that your animation was jerky, there you could find it. But anyway, so that's the center of mass, and then down on the ground here is another circle, which is the shadow of the center of mass, basically in the direction of gravity, but for here, our purposes here, straight down. And right now, that shadow of the center of mass is inside of our ground contact rectangle all the time. So, for one thing, it should be a green color right now if my code was working properly. But my ability to detect that this circle is inside this rectangle seems to be compromised at the moment for some reason. And if I intentionally put it out of bounds, then it should be red, and it will get that right. Now, I can't move the root right now. I don't allow you while in animation to move the root yet. It's going to be a big part, because in an animation, you want to associate each keyframe with a root offset and rotation, so that over the course of a long animation, the skeleton could wander, the stage. This line here is the edge of the stage, and to get its job done. Like if it has to walk over here and then dig a hole and then install a water pump and then walk back over here and stand still, well, that's what it had to do. But if that were the case, then I want to have a marker here in animation land. I want to be able to place a marker saying, this is where the water pump is going to get built. And then at the game level, at the host level, it has access to that, and it says, where you're standing right now, and per your behavior digging a well pump, you have told me that the preferred offset for digging a well pump is this. I will look to see, is this a good place for a water pump? And I'll decide, by my rules, no, that's the emperor's portico. You can't put a pump there. But anyway, so the idea is that the center of mass is changing, and I'm detecting when it's outside the comfort zone. And I'll make that information available to the host so that he'll know that, in my opinion, you should be falling, and because the point is here, I think you should be falling in that direction. Which is to say, I'm always in some state, and the state is generally just standing around. And while in that state, I'm looping a continuous animation, but it's not necessarily, well, it includes artfully posed things, and it's those artfully posednesses that give your character the sass and personality that makes one character different from another. But once you abstract the sass and personality, the actual physics of saying, oh my God, I'm unstable, I'm about to fall in this direction, I would be much better off if I could have a ground contact point that was at least this far to the left without compromising this ground contact point, which is the only one that's saving me. So at this point, for one reason or another, he makes the decision that he's going to leave his right foot alone, and he's going to try and solve the problem with his left foot. And hopefully his left foot is already in motion because he was already doing this for a while, and he's now in a walk cycle, in a walking oscillation. But in the case where he's not in that yet, he just makes a guess as to where it would be nice to have his foot, and then he kind of thinks, well, just move my foot straight forward and then straight backwards. I have poses, artfully provided poses for me that do that. And so what I'll do is I'll look at those poses and I'll see the motion that they have on my foot, and then I'll scale them as necessary so as to meet or exceed my needs for the speed. And that's what I'll set my goal to, and then I'll start playing that animation, and it will arrive at the right point at the right time because I will have, planned it. The heaviest thing is the head, and then I actually have the hips and root each the same weight, which is each 1/2 a head. So there's 1.5 heads worth of weight here. I bias the core. I think the waist and the chest are maybe given a little more mass than maybe I can justify. And then the feet and hands have sort of extra mass. And in theory, if you were holding something, I would be able to add that mass to the mass of your hand or wrist. But in theory, if I go to the pose screen and select the first pose, which was the first keyframe I added, and now I come over to animation and I add it again as the most recent keyframe, in theory, it should no longer jump. It smoothly animates back to the starting frame, and then it jumps to the starting frame, which is instantaneous. But since it's the same pose, you don't notice it anymore, other than he seems to be holding this pose longer, maybe. So it makes sense that I should have to be in pose mode to pick the pose that I want to add as a keyframe. So that's one thing I want to do. And then another thing is I want to do a little synthetic road bed. Just little kind of a particle system, but the particles just move like a conveyor belt and then come back around the other side. And so whatever angle you're at, you see the gravel going by, sparse gravel going by. And then that just gives you an idea. Then that will be driven by the host API saying the character is moving at 3 miles per hour, or this many meters per second. Anyway, so the road bed is moving at whatever the host said the speed was at. During any part of the animation, any part of the skeleton that is in ground contact, and hopefully that's just the feet, must move with the road bed. So it's like it'll be IK repositioned in real time to follow the road bed. And if you were to do nothing about it, and the skeleton is still pinned on its little root, what it should result in is the lower half of the body getting pulled back and the feet eventually dragging on the ground. And then when and that just comes from IK to ground kind of stuff. But then once you turn on the autonomous walking stuff, then it says, oh, that's a bad thing to have both my feet pulled back, because now my ground contact is also way back over here and my mass is all mostly forward and I'm totally going to fall down. So I totally need to move a leg forward, and I need to move it forward at least this much. And it, as described earlier, starts to schedule forward motion. But when the time comes to play the forward motion, it's willing to use pose information from the art supplied animation. But no matter what, it's going to inverse kinematic glue the foot to the ground, and that's going to apply any additional joint angle changes required, while preserving bone lengths and hopefully not looking too unnatural. Now, I don't have any constraint system yet, really, so I don't have anything that prevents me from bending bones backwards or sideways from the normally intended directions. In pose mode, this is a list of poses. In animate mode, this is going to be a list of animations. There are 64 pose slots that you select with this control. There are 64 animation slots, which you select with this control. An animation is a series of keyframes. And what I'm saying now is, it's open. You're selecting which animation slot you want to work on. You tap on the ones you've got, you tap on the empty ones. It instantly changes to show you what's in that slot. And there's no real concept of losing your work by changing the slot, because your work is the slot. You have any editing you've done is already in the slot. And so on a pose screen, again, you're normally seeing the list of all possible poses. You tap the pose you want to work on, and now you tap outside of it. I minimize it. It shrinks down. It loses its scroll. It reminds me that I'm editing pose 1. And then all of this screen real estate here is blank again and does not interfere with my ability to move the camera. And it doesn't conflict with my ability to tap on a joint without accidentally selecting a new pose slot, which happens a lot. Now, partially that happens because the gray area comes all the way up here, and I could totally make the touch sensitive and gray overlap area much lower, like half as low, like maybe even just bring it up to the top of these little guidelines. Let's just move the center of mass straight back. Back more. Back even more. Back as far as we can get it. Okay, let's move these arms back. These arms back. Okay, now see, I bring him up 90 degrees and his foot did exactly the right thing. How's the center mass changing? Yeah, okay. Okay, is that as far as I can get it to go? Does that look like a valid center of mass? Yeah, that's about right. And there's no ground contact point. So now let's try giving it a single ground contact point. There we go. And now we'll zoom back in. And recenter. Zoom. Recenter. Zoom. Cool, huh? So just that one tiny little point, the tip of our toe, is the only point that's touching the ground. And right now I could drive that below the ground easily enough, I think. So long as the bones can stretch out straight. So that's about that far underground. And when IK is turned on, then that will be automatically pushed up. And we can simulate the pushing up by just moving it in the up direction. Oops. By just moving it in the up direction. And as you can see, it doesn't just move up because it couldn't push. You know, if we look up here to the hip, we might see that it's actually already pushed the hip up as far as it can go. Oh no, it could push the hip up more. So it just did kind of the right thing. I kind of like what it did. Anyway, now it's in ground contact with 2 points. So it's got a slightly nicer thing, but we're still falling. So let's lift the toe, the tip of the toe. Boom! Just our heel. Just our heel. Okay, bring our foot down. Okay, so now, we would want to be falling over. If we were really bent to this degree, we would expect that we would be falling over. And so, let's say we just, in the simplest of all possible worlds, we just say, hey, you know, the hip joint, if I just rotate here and do a minimal amount of IK, I can just get that out like that. And my foot is now bending completely backwards. So do that. Okay, and now, oh, look at what a fix that was. Our center of mass is right in the center of our ground contact. Okay, does this really look posed? I mean, can we see? Does it look left-right posed? Yeah, actually that looks quite plausible. Okay, let's again, we can't really Can't move our root yet. So let's just move our waist a little to the right. Okay, and now we've lost ground contact. We are now just barely falling. And we'll turn that a little more. Okay, so now we're in trouble again. We're definitely falling. And so we just move our arm out. Let's move our center of mass. Yeah, not only can we plan by putting down a foot, we can also plan by moving, quote, on mission non-critical masses. So if the legs are basically involved in the auto walk, trying to solve the problem from that direction, the non-falling problem, then the upper body is basically just to be used as a counterbalance to move the actual center of mass as opposed to changing the ground contact rectangle region. So let's see, oh, this is a new build. Is it easier to do that? Yeah, it is. Oh, good. Okay, so let's try and fix it with this contact. Okay. What I like to do is, if I have a problem to solve, I like to solve it half with the first angle and then half with the second angle kind of deal. So you don't just end up with giant kinks. Okay, so again, here we are, we're back to stability. Now I'd like it to be trying to get the center of mass in the exact center. And so even now when it's stable, it would still be kind of trying to tune itself just to move things back and forth a little bit. And maybe, you know, at the right level, there's just some randomness in there. There's some tiredness if joints hold the same angle for too long, they start to move or something. I don't know. But visually, how does it feel? Does it feel like this is a tool that allows me to decide if this looks like a graceful posture? And as an animation, well, here, I just added this one, right? So let's add it as a keyframe. Boom. So now it's our, oh, we added it to our, oh yeah. This is why I need the timeline, because I'd really like to have removed that last one we added and then added this one and then put that last one in again. Yeah, so that'll be another nice thing, that with the timeline, well, we'll see. Anyway, so far that's it. Okay, another little progress video. So I've just made a really quick little walk animation, and I'm using these little ground marker detectors so that I have 8 cells in the animation, and for 4 of them, each foot spends 4 of them on the ground, and the goal is for the foot to move along the ground at a constant rate. So at any given moment, we want the ground, we want it to look like a continuous thing. And eventually I'll add my little speckled roadway markers, and then what I'll do is anytime a foot is on the ground and moving, I will also move the roadbed. And then if you've made a nice walk cycle, the roadbed will appear to move continuously and smoothly. And if you haven't, it'll be your 2 feet will act kind of like 2 fingers zoom / rotate, and the road will be all weird and strange until you fix that. And that will help you design an animation that keeps the feet on the ground nicely all by itself. Then, if you turn on the IK button, it will force the feet to do that no matter what. And if I've done it right, then you turn the IK on, and then you just provide a velocity to the root, and I will automatically move my feet forward to keep my balance point inside of the ground contact region. And we'll just kind of look at that from a couple of angles to be exciting. Let's see. So this is not a perfect walk cycle by any means. But I just love it when it gets up down to its tiptoes and it shrinks to just the tiptoe size contact point. Boink! But it's kind of cool because it's like I actually got a much clearer understanding of what the needs of the walk cycle were once I added those markers. And that's it. Thank you.